We're going to take a look at language and how we think about it and talk about it as language teachers. The first thing to clarify are the two areas we talk about as teachers: the systems themselves, which we refer to as language systems or language, and the skills we need to be able to communicate using those systems. First, let's look at what these skills are. We need our learners to gain listening comprehension. We need to help them speak the language, read texts, and understand details, specific things, and overall messages. Lastly, we need our learners to be able to write in English, and this might also include learning our alphabet and learning how to read from left to right. There are many other skills around language learning, and not everything, as is everything in life, fits into neat boxes like this. But for the sake of simplicity, as we begin to look at what teaching a language such as English is, we'll stay with these main categories. We divide language, or these language systems, into three areas. They are functions, lexis, and grammar. You'll be familiar with grammar, but let's unpack what these mean for you in practice. Functions are the phrases or strings of words used with a special objective. Let's get Neil to start us off with an example to work with. What is the function of Neil's underlined phrase? Is it a fixed expression, meaning do we change the form? Can you think of any contexts when you often hear or use this phrase? Think about these questions for a moment. Pause the presentation if you need to and write down your ideas. You need to demonstrate to the interviewer and trainers during the course that you can talk about language simply. If you can't answer the questions right now, don't worry. This is a self-diagnosis test to see what knowledge and language awareness you already have, so you can decide if you need to do a little more preparation or not. We use this phrase as an expression when we are giving advice or making a suggestion. So we can say that it's a function for making or giving suggestions. It's a fixed expression, meaning we always say it in the same way or we use the same order of words. And in this case it looks like this. The base form of the verb is the form you find in the dictionary. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as the infinitive verb without to, or simply V or V0. And regarding contexts, it's through the context of when our learners will most likely hear this language that we teachers tend to present the language. When we speak English, we really are very predictable. You can almost predict at times the kinds of phrases a certain person might use in a certain given situation. This again is a skill that we teach. And that brings us to the next area of language systems. So we talk about lexis in these terms. It is the level of language consisting of vocabulary as opposed to grammar or syntax. When we talk about lexis, we talk about groups of words and phrases, collocations, idioms, and prefixes and suffixes. If we talk about words in groups, we can think of, for example, what words do we need to use to talk about a hairy dog? Well, we use words like paws, muzzle, ears, tail, and fur. This forms a lexical group. With collocations, we think about words that typically go together. They go together so often you can even predict them. If I say fast, you might say food, fast food. These are what we call common collocations. Idioms are set phrases that have become fixed in our language cultures. There are things like as mad as a hatter, or to be all dolled up, or to run like the wind. And then finally, a knowledge of prefixes and suffixes means we are able to extend our vocabulary. We know that if we put dis, which means not or off, if we put it in front of a verb, we get things like dislike, discover, disassociate, and distract. So Neil has extended his last comment for the sake of our having an example. Please, Neil. Now analyse this language here. Can you find examples of groups of words, collocations, idiomatic expressions, or any prefixes or suffixes? Pause the presentation and take your notes. When we talk about grammar, we're talking about the whole system and structure of a language and the rules of correct usage. As teachers, we need to know the terms such as the base verb form and the names of the tenses. We need to know what modals are, conditionals, progressives, adjectives, nouns and noun phrases, adverbs and adverbial phrases, articles, prepositions, gerund, past participle and present participle, and subordinate clauses, things like that. Right, so Neil has kindly given us our phrase to work with again. Let's unpack it in terms of grammar. What tenses can you see in this utterance? Can you see a conditional? Choose one of the tenses you see. How can you clearly write the rule of it? How can you explain in simple terms the meaning of this form? And could it change depending on intonation? Take a moment to consider these questions. Again, this is the kind of thinking you need to be able to express in an interview for a training course, and then on the course itself, when you are designing lessons. Neil's dog pronoun, who you will see in action in the grammar course, will now take us through analysing some grammar. So a couple of things we've picked up here. We've got the future simple and the second conditional. If we take the future simple, let's first look at its form. Now let's look at how we can explain the meaning in simple terms. The simple future is a verb tense that's used to talk about things that haven't happened yet. In this case, the tense is being used as a form of making a prediction. It can also be used to talk about personal intentions or promises to oneself. For example, I will not eat cheese for a month. We use the future will also in the conditional form. If water reaches 100 degrees Celsius, will it boil? Yes, it will. It's a predictable future event or result of an action. Let's think of some concept-checking questions to help us see if we get the meaning. Answer this question. If we're talking about the future will, has this event happened? Here's another question. When Neil uses this form, does he feel confident about what he is saying? That's why we use this will form for promises, predictions, and intentions about the future, because we will it to happen. We want it to happen. And finally, another question. If Neil was to say, it might be a riveting narrative, how does that change the meaning? If you want to find out more about how we change modal verbs, we drill down on the shades of confidence and condition in the grammar refresher. So we've looked at form, the rules of grammar layout, the meaning, and we've looked at the kind of questions we can ask ourselves to check meaning. And now we have to analyse how things are actually said. English is a non-tonal language. Mandarin, for example, uses tone to convey the meaning of a word. In English, we play with tone in a different way. We change the meaning of whole utterances depending on what word we choose to emphasise. Listen and think of how I change meaning just by changing the place or word I emphasise. It will be a riveting narrative. It will be a riveting narrative. When I emphasise the word will, I'm emphasising the promise of what is to come. If I emphasise the word riveting, I'm emphasising the result. Here's another phrase. I'll have you glued to the screen. I'll have you glued to the screen. If I emphasise the word glued, I'm emphasising the action. If I emphasise I'll, I'm emphasising who is doing the action. So as you can see, language awareness tasks are aimed to get us unpacking language for ourselves, so we are able to break it down to teach in simple terms to others. We teachers need to understand the differences in meaning and form and pronunciation, and also another word, register. When we talk about register, we're talking about whether something is polite or casual or familiar or more formally said or written. Our learners need to know these things so they know what phrases they can use when and how. So there are two things you can remember. MFPR, that is meaning, form, pronunciation and register, and then the questions that help clarify meaning.